Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for anyone helping someone go through the tween and teen years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. Now, it's the end of another year, and I thought it would be a great time to take stock and think about how we can move into this next year with purpose and the ability to grow in our roles as parents, grandparents, caregivers. And in past years, I've created episodes in which I talked about making New Year's resolutions and my own specific technique that I've honed throughout my life, and the link will be in the notes. But this year, I thought wouldn't it be good to talk to a father who went from being almost divorced, overweight, faced with financial upheaval, to rebuilding a thriving marriage, paying off a 6-figure debt, dropping 60 pounds and connecting with his role as a father and breadwinner. Mitchell Osmond is going to talk to us about proven techniques we can use, particularly for working parents searching for connection and confidence in their home life. Welcome to the show, Mitchell.
Thank you so much for having me today, Rachel. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Me too. Now, one of the strengths of my podcast is that I'm not an expert. I'm a flawed parent. I'm trying to figure things out and as I go along and then share what I learn so others can benefit. You're in a similar boat, really. So can you share the pivotal moments in your own journey that led you to rethink your approach to marriage and fatherhood?
Yeah, I thank you for asking me, and thank you for having me on the show today, Rachel. I really appreciate it. And I love, what you said about being flawed, because I think people can make the mistake of listening to a podcast and put people on a pedestal and say, well, it was easy for them, or maybe they don't quite understand because they got it all figured out. And so I usually say, let me be the first to tell you, I've done some things right because I've done everything else wrong. I've learned everything about the hardest way possible. And so we're speaking from personal experience and challenges we've faced. But you asked me about some turning points for me, and you kind of alluded to some of the challenges that I was facing at the time. And I think that's a great place to start. So for me, there were really 2 key sort of catalytic moments that really spurred me into this transformation. And one was a fight. The second one was a funeral. And so let's talk about the fight, or let's talk about the fight first. So if you could picture me and my wife, we're sitting in the living room, sitting on the couch. We were married for about 3 years at this time. And I always wanted to be a father. Like you had said, I mean, I was raised in dysfunction, crime, abuse, drugs, alcohol in the home, dysfunctional family, all those different things. My father was an alcoholic, didn't have a relationship with him. And so I was determined to really give my future family a different life. I was focused on that. And so when my wife and I started having this conversation about what it looks like to have children, she looked at me and said, "Are you kidding me? I would never bring a child into this relationship. Why do you think that would be a good idea? Our marriage is broken." And I was gobsmacked, Rachel. I was like, what? Is that bad? And that was the first day she used the D word that we had said we would never use, divorce. And I will never forget being so shocked of thinking everything was fine. Were we happy? We were okay. We were kind of like roommates wearing rings, and I had no idea how bad it was. And then we had a huge fight. And then, so I'm going on throughout that week thinking, I don't know if she's going to leave today or tomorrow or next week or what, but she's clearly on the verge of leaving. I'm 60 at this point. I was recently let go of a senior leadership position. Like you had said, I was 60 pounds overweight. I had gained all that weight. I was drinking and doing drugs daily to cope with all the different pain I was experiencing. We were $100,000 in debt, and now our marriage was on the verge of divorce. I was in a rough place. And so the second part of the story was the funeral. And this was about 7 days after, 1 week after the funeral, or after the fight. And so I was invited to sing at this funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man, okay? And then the minister was talking about all the things that he had done. And I'll never forget, I was side stage and I was strapping on my guitar and I was getting ready to sing. And I overheard him ask the congregation, he had said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die today, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And in that moment, Rachel, I started to sing the last song, and I could barely choke out the lyrics because all I could think was, if this were my funeral, no one would be saying, I want to model the marriage he had. I want to model the finances or the health that he had. He's an inspiring man. They probably would have said at that point in my life, man, he had a hard life, and then it ended. He didn't get a chance to turn it around. And I had this picture of where my life was headed. And so that day, I went home and I made a commitment that I would change, that I would become the man I knew I needed to be for my wife and for my future family, if I had any chance at having one. That I had to die to everything that I knew to become some new evolution of myself. And that was the challenge that I faced. And I had this thought, every family goes through trauma, and lots of families have these generational cycles, these curses, people talk about. Every family has a curse breaker. That day I was determined that I would be the curse breaker for my family, so that, my father was an alcoholic, his father was an alcoholic, and it went on for generations and generations. I said, today this stops with me. And so, Rachel, I brought 5 men around me. I literally looked into my life and I said, who has the best marriage that I know, every area that I need to grow in? Who has the best marriage that I know of? Who has the most money that I know of? Who's in the best shape? And I reached out. I gathered 5 men around me, which actually now in my coaching practice, I call it the Iron Five. And every man has their own Iron Five to surround them. And then within 18 months, a year and a half, we paid off $100,000 of debt and completely restored our marriage, lost the 60 pounds, built a lean, confident, strong body, and was clean of distractions and substances, lived my life in a totally different way. And then later, because I was always in positions of leadership, people would ask, man, what's going on with you? Like, your life, you're on fire. You lost the weight. You got financial peace. And so I started helping friends, helping brothers of mine, building budgets, helping them connect with their wives, going to the gym with them and training them. And one of my mentors said, man, if you really want to take that question, are you living a life worthy of imitation? You want to take it seriously? Well, let's take that trash and turn it into treasure. Share your story with the world and help more men. And so that was when I launched the Dad Nation podcast 2 years ago. Now it's a globally rated top 5% podcast. And then 6 months into that, I launched the coaching practice. And that's what I do today, Rachel, is I help the man that I used to be. Ed Milet said this a while ago on his podcast, you are the most qualified to help the person you used to be. And that's all I do. I look for men who are struggling in those areas. And my whole thing is I help high-performing men reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness without sacrificing their career success. And that was who I was. And so that's all I do today. Does that make sense? That's a little bit about my story.
Yeah, no, it does. And it actually resonates so well with me because I have a very similar story. And I think what interests me is a couple of things. And we've done an episode on grief, and we talked in that exactly about what you're saying, that one of the amazing things to do is, rather than wait until you're going to die or someone close to you is going to die, why not start living that life now? And asking those questions can be so profoundly moving and insightful. But also this sense that you didn't really know that things were going wrong, and that I do think an awful lot of us go into our lives and our parenting on autopilot, and we're just playing out roles that we've had before, and it takes a lot of insight and energy to change that direction. So, how did you said that your father was alcoholic and you came from that kind of background? To what extent did that relationship with your own father influence your approach to being a husband and then a father? How much is it? Because we don't just suddenly go, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to, we actually have to be really mindful about making changes. To what extent has it impacted on the role that you had as a husband and a father?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Since I started the podcast, I've really wanted to build a community of like-minded people who are also trying to figure things out, keep growing and supporting each other. I finally decided to open a Substack account. If you subscribe, you'll get a message letting you know when a new episode is out, or I've created a new blog about something. Paid subscribers can ask for private advice anytime and also download PDFs of the key points in the show so you have a reminder and you don't have to keep rewinding, listening and taking notes. You'll find it all at teenagersuntangled.substack.com.
Yeah, that's a great question. At first it was anger that fueled me because I was, people who grow up in homes like that, they go in two different directions. They follow in the footsteps or they go the completely different direction,
Yeah,
and so for me, I had so much anger, and that was what happened in my marriage. I had unhealed wounds that began to bleed into my relationship, and my wife was paying the price. And so I was angry, and I was determined that I would not, come hell or high water, I would not become that man. But when I would yell at her, because I was the worst, I would yell at her, and I could hear my father's voice, my father's words in mine, and I hated it. I inherited his flash temper. I inherited his addictive personality. And so it was the anger in the beginning that fueled me to make the change. But then after I did the healing work, I began to understand that, well, he didn't have an example, and his father didn't have an example, and his father didn't have an example. Yeah. So how could they have succeeded? I'd like to think that they would have reached out but back then there weren't resources like there are today, right?
And we weren't talking about these things. Nobody was talking about this.
Mm-hmm. And then the second piece, then it moved from anger to a place of gratitude of like, you know what? Perhaps if that didn't happen to me, I'd be maybe a little bit more entitled or maybe feel like, I didn't have much to learn. And I actually began to be thankful for how I was raised, and because now I have a clean slate. I know what I don't want to do. I know who I don't want to be. And so when you have that kind of clarity, it's like, okay, well, now I got a fresh canvas. Who do I want to become? What kind of father do I want to be? And I get to handpick people in my life that are incredible models and say, okay, what does it look like to be a husband like him? Let's do that. And so yeah, those were that was how that relationship affected me. So I'm thankful now. I mean, it took me a long time to get there. Don't get me wrong, right? But that was.
And I think it's a big journey, and I think we should never think there's no hope and that it's all over for me. And that's certainly, I think, why a lot of people listen to this podcast is because they've noticed that there's something's not quite right, and then how do I, where do I find the model for what I want to be? And so, how did you then think about healthy masculinity? You'd had a bad model, and what do you think is a good model of healthy masculinity in the home?
Yeah, man, that's such a great question. Well, let me say this. Let me tell you where I learned it from, and then how I see it today. And I'll share some statistics with you that will be a little bit alarming, I think. I originally then learned it from these mentors, because they became my fathers. Essentially, I had 5 fathers who walked me through the fire. These men were loving. They were men of faith. They were incredible husbands, great stewards of their finances, all those different things. They taught me what masculinity looked like. Of course, I did years of therapy. I did years of coaching, a lot of different things. But here's the thing about masculinity. Masculinity is caught, not taught. You cannot teach a boy how to be a masculine. He has to observe it, and he has to catch it by watching that man interact with other men and be invited to those things. I didn't have that, so I had to catch it late in life. You know what I mean? And then so through that, the mentorship, the therapy, and all those different things, when I sort of came out of the cocoon, if you will, and experienced that transformation, I became a mad scientist of studying these things and understanding why are men so confused? Why are men so resistant to step into their role? And really at the end of the day it's a combination of, like what you said earlier, there's societal pressures. There's the confusion about media and, all the different things that are said about men and masculinity. I mean, I get heat all the time when I use words like masculinity because I'm labeled as toxic, right? You can't even say that word these days without being canceled. Oh, 100%. And so when people think about masculinity, they think about the far right, like red pill, alpha male, super domineering. That's like the far pendulum, which I'm not interested in. But then you've got the other end of the pendulum, which is men who are soft, who are afraid to stand up, who don't take ownership, who are people just mow them over, and they get taken advantage of. They don't know how to be a father. They don't know how to be a husband. So they become sort of apathetic and they check out, right? And so when people ask me, what is a modern man in 2025? I say the middle of that pendulum is really what we're shooting for. When people say toxic masculinity, I would call that perhaps not toxic. I would call it immature masculinity, because men who are immature have those qualities. They're insecure, so they overassert their dominance, right? They're insecure, so they have to inflate themselves. They get overly assertive. So it's not toxic, it's immaturity. Men who have maturity and wisdom understand that it is both important to be strong and to be courageous and assertive when you need to be, but it's also important to be sensitive and emotional, have emotional intelligence, how to create space, hold space for your wife and for your children, and to connect with them on an emotional level, but also know how to be, a little dangerous if you need to be, to protect your family, right? A man's responsibility are to protect, to provide, and to preside. Okay, those three things. And so for a man to be able to do both and swing, different ways on the pendulum at any given time is so critical, because we know now more than ever that men are so important in the family. And here's where I'll share some statistics with you. We know in the U.S. today, 1 in 4 kids will grow up without a father in the home. And so some parts of society would say men don't matter, but the numbers say otherwise. So, for example, 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And this last one, which is crazy, 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. And so while some people might say men don't matter and we don't need masculinity or we don't need dads, I would say the numbers say something very, very different. And simultaneously, men are more lonely than ever. They're more medicated than ever, right? The average man in the U.S. today spends over 2,000 hours per year in front of a screen, escaping reality, checking out. The number of close friends that men have has gone from 3% to 15% of the men who said they have zero close friends in the past since 1995. I mean, that's incredible. And so all those numbers really kind of, I hope, makes us think. If you're listening today and you're a man and you're like, I don't know my purpose. I feel powerful at work, but I feel powerless when I come home. Well, let's have that conversation about what it looks like, or if you think that your impact doesn't matter, yes, it does. Absolutely. Your children
absolutely does
need you. Yeah.
Yes. And I've noticed that as my husband has matured as a human being, as well as a father, and my daughters have grown, that connection has become more and more important. And I can see that bond shifting because he's becoming more present and more interested in what's going on. And what would be your advice because this is really great advice, but what would be your advice within the home to be showing up?
You know what? There's a lot of different things, but one of the most simple things you can do is be where your feet are. If your feet are in the kitchen, sitting at the kitchen table, be there. If your feet are, in your daughter's bedroom and she's talking to you about her day, be there. Don't be at work in your mind, right? And that's the problem.
Yeah.
So many of us as men, we go to work and we think about our families. But then when we come home and we're with our families, and all we're thinking about is work. And so we can never fully be truly present where we are. And so there's lots of ways we can do that. But I'll give you one simple practice that a lot of my clients do. I call it the 5-minute reset. And so when you come in, when you're driving home from work and you park your car, take 5 minutes, right? Do your family a favor and do this 5-minute routine. Take some time and close all the loops. Send all the text messages, wrap up all the emails, close up all the conversations. And then you simply do some simple breathing exercises. The one I'm a fan of is 4-7-8. It's the Marines do it, the SEALs do it. You inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, release for 8. And then you ask yourself a couple questions. Number one, what does it look like for me to be a present, loving father when I walk through that door? What does it look like for me to be a loving and nurturing husband when I walk through that door? And here's the thing, that might sound like a simple question, but Rachel, when you ask yourself that question, especially as a man, you have to answer it. And instinctively, we know what the answer is. And if you genuinely ask yourself, okay, what does it look like for me to walk through that door as a present, loving father? If you answer that, the answer is going to be, I'm going to get on the floor and play with my kids. I'm going to pick them up. I'm going to hug them. I'm not going to continue emailing on my phone as I walk past them to the bedroom, right? Or if I ask the question about my wife, I'm probably going to go in and I'm going to look her in the eyes and I'm going to give her a hug and I'm going to give her a kiss. I'm going to say, hey, I missed you today. Instead of going and sitting at the table and scrolling Instagram. You know what I mean? So it's that 5 minutes where you do this reset. And for us as men, we need the reset because we go 8, 10, 12 hours a day fixing things, creating solutions, solving things. And then we come home, and if we don't turn that switch off, it's those very skills that get us into trouble when we get home. Because your wife doesn't need strategies. Your kids don't need an effective plan, a strategic plan. But what happens is we don't turn off that switch, and we go home and we start treating our wife and our kids like employees or colleagues. And that's not what they need.
Yes. I have actually said to my husband in the past, I'm not your secretary.
Exactly.
Because every now and then he'll slip into that. I think this is good advice for women too. I think all of it, because whether I've got friends who go out to work and the husband's at home. I think even if we're both at work, taking that pause and also finding time in the evening or in the weekend or the time, because there's always more that we can be doing. There's always, always, always more housework, more shopping, more everything. And it's actually making a conscious effort to say, okay, I'm going to be here. I'm just going to be here. But you also talk in your podcast about being present rather than necessarily perfect. What do you think that sounds like or looks like?
Yeah, I say that all the time. Your wife, your family doesn't need your perfection. They just want your presence. Right. And what we go to work, right? And we get rewarded for results, right? A perfectly executed plan gets its performance bonus. It's all about perfection. It's all about the show, especially guys in business. It's the front, right? Put on your game face, whatever. Like, we get it. Your male listeners will get that. But your family doesn't need that version of you. In fact, that version of you makes them feel insecure. So, for example, the first time I told my wife about how I was feeling, I remember I came home and I was so stressed and I was anxious about something. And she's like, how are you doing? And as a man, I said, yeah, I'm good. I went to work and I did this and I closed this deal and I talked to this person. She was like, no. You're telling me what you did. I'm asking you how you're doing. And I had a moment where I was like, she said, you always do that. I ask you how you're doing emotionally and you tell me what you did. And that's because men find their value in what we do. That's just universally known. That's why the first question every man asks each other is, what do you do? Right? So the first time I got up the courage to say, yeah, I'm actually really anxious about this contract and I'm not sure it's going to go through. And I'm a little bit scared of like what happens if it doesn't. It took me like, I don't know, a half hour to get the courage to say that. I'll never forget. She looked at me. She got watery eyed. And she said, thank you so much for just being honest. She said, for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm married to a robot.
No.
Right? Because she's like, you just seem like you're this model of perfection and nothing's ever wrong. And it makes me uncomfortable talking about the things that I'm struggling with. And so I can't connect with you because it seems like you're perfect. Meanwhile, I was trying to be perfect because I felt like I had to hold the line and take care of everything. And you know what I mean? And so it was this pivotal moment where I was like, she doesn't need me to be perfect, right? She needs me to just be present and be here. And that means sometimes exercising humility. Sometimes that means just saying, yeah, I'm struggling today. I have this hard conversation with my brother-in-law or whatever. It could be anything. And then just simply putting the phone down and turning the TV off, right? The phone is the hugest wedge in our relationships. And so with our children, what that looks like is to pursue presence over perfection, is to have the humility to apologize and say, hey, Dad got it wrong. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have raised my voice. I shouldn't have snapped. I shouldn't have talked to your mom that way. I'm not perfect, but I'm really trying my best. And
yes,
that's leading the way, right? So when I say what do they need, and when it comes to presence, that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and they call that the do-over, just the ability to say you're sorry and then hold that moment. And it's interesting that you talk about the fear of saying that you are scared about something or you're worried about something, because Andrew Hampton, who's a headmaster I interviewed, said that the thing that teenage boys fear most is shame, and that they don't like to talk about shame because it's shameful to say that you feel ashamed about something. And so I wonder, I think it's very hard to then unpick that as you grow up and have those conversations. Are you noticing a difference? Because obviously you sort of pivoted, you found your group of men friends who can support you in this new journey. Generally, are you noticing a difference around you in the way that men talk about parenting?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I like to think that the tide is turning, slightly. I think that it's by far not enough yet. There's not enough conversation. But let's just quickly go back to what you're saying about teenage boys and then men struggling with emotions and how to be honest and open. There's actually a term coined for this. It's called normative male alexithymia. And that's a bit of a mouthful.
I've never heard that.
You can Google it. But alexithymia, if you break that down into the Greek, it's alexis thymos, which literally means to be without words for emotion. And so if you put that together, normative male alexithymia means it's normal for males to be without words for emotions, meaning it's a part of the male expression. And that's for a lot of different reasons, but we wrestle finding the words to say and talk about our emotions. And that's why when our wives ask, hey, what? I'll never forget, my wife asked me, how's your heart? When we first got married, I'm like, what are you talking about? What is it? And so that language felt so uncomfortable to me, but she was trying to connect on an emotional level. Her dad was an emotional man, right? Very emotionally intelligent. That was normal language for them. For me, it was not. And so if you're listening to this today and you're a woman and you're in a relationship with a man that doesn't really talk about his feelings, understand that that's part of the normal, that is part of the male expression. And if you're a man listening and you wrestle with that, understand that you're not broken. All right, it's normal, but our wiring doesn't necessarily, our wiring explains us, but it doesn't excuse us. There's a big difference, right? So because we have the resources today to learn how to be emotionally intelligent, to learn how to connect with our families and to be truly present. And so that is why I think so many men wrestle with their emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I would question that, though, because I interviewed Brendan Kwiatkowski about masculinity some time back. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me was he said, right from the age of, 4 or 5 years old, the way that we relate to boys is different. And we almost train out of them the opportunity to talk about their feelings and express themselves, because they learn very quickly that they really shouldn't be too upset by something, and that really what's the most useful word is, the best expression is anger. Like that's a really acceptable thing rather than any other of the range of emotions that they might be feeling. And so then if you haven't been trained to reach inside yourself and think, oh, what is this? Then you're not going to have those words. One of the things I talk about a lot is, when we're discussing with our sons and they tell us something, one of the most useful things we can be doing with them is just saying, it sounds like you're feeling this, and trying to give them the words to identify that particular emotion, if we can see what that emotion might be. And they may say, no, it's not that at all. Or they may go, oh, yeah, that. Because I think trying to encourage that lexicon is critically important. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. And that's exactly the reason why we're in the situation we're in today. It's cultural conditioning. You know, you think about it, right? We're just a few generations removed from extreme trauma. Like you think about World War II, men came back from that and didn't have resources. They had the bottle, they had the Legion or VA or wherever they went for support, and they raised sons and taught them, hey, stuff it. I did, deal with it, right? And of course, not every man did this. I'm generalizing, but the vast majority of us. And then those sons raised men in a similar way. And so I agree with you 100%. It's on us as parents, especially fathers, to understand the importance of helping our children with emotional intelligence, especially our sons, because the masculine in today's society, it's getting better, but we're really validated, and I would think we are promoted for what we do, how we contribute, what we build, how we provide, not how we feel or anything like that, right? So it's all about do. And so that's why boys, one of the questions that boys grow up with, asking themselves is, am I enough? Do I have it, what it takes? And it's up to our fathers to answer that question for our sons. Problem is when these boys grow up, if they don't have that question answered by their fathers, they're going to find that answer somewhere else. And so what happens, or they might not have that answer or that question answered. And so you've got these grown men walking around like little boys still asking that question. Do I have what it takes? Am I enough? And they're looking and they're finding it they're finding that validation in work. They're finding that validation in whatever it is. And so legitimately, Rachel, with my clients, I've got a feelings list that it's just a list of emotions, because typically as men, we got like mad, sad, pissed off, anxious, whatever, right? Very, very few. There's maybe 5. And so a list of emotions that are descriptors, right? Overwhelmed, impatient, irritated, right? Or whatever. And then for guys who can't even connect with that, I've got a chart of emojis. Emojis of like sad face, happy face, frustrated. Because it's amazing actually how we connect with emojis. And they'll legit point to the one. They're like, that is what I feel. Okay, well, here are some words for that, right? And now how can we say that? And how can we use that in our relationship to connect with our wives? Because on an emotional level, because here's another statistic that's kind of crazy. We know in the U.S. today, up to 70% of divorces are initiated by the women in the relationship, right? In situations, but when you dig deeper into those statistics, in situations where the wife has a high education or is a high earner, that number jumps to 90%. 9 out of every 10 divorces are initiated by women in those situations. Of those divorces, 80% of the time, the main reason cited for the divorce is not cheating, it's not money, it's not sex, it's not kids, it's a lack of emotional connection. Whoa. I didn't feel connected to my husband emotionally. I didn't feel like he cared about my feelings, because the feminine is driven by emotion, by relationship, by connection. And so if the female's greatest need is to connect on an emotional level, if that's 80% of the reason of 90% of divorces being initiated, then it's important for us as men to understand how to connect with our wives emotionally.
Yes.
And this
so just for your marriage.
Exactly. And this is why I do the work I do. 99% of my work is helping men connect with their wives on an emotional level, because of all the reasons we said on the show. This is where we wrestle, right? And so we have situations where you start out, in a great place, but then eventually you drift. Because that man's greatest needs, 2 greatest needs, are to feel respected and to feel competent. A woman's needs are to feel seen, heard, and safe. If we had more time, we could break those down. But what a woman wants is to be loved, to be nurtured, to be connected with. But a husband doesn't necessarily need those things. He needs to be respected and competent. That's what he craves the most. And I've done this before, Rachel. You ask a room of 500 guys, would you rather hear the words from your wife, I love you, or I respect you? 99% of the room, the guys will put up their hand. They would rather hear the words, I respect you.
Fascinating.
Than I love you. It actually doesn't mean that much to us as men. Generally speaking, there's always exceptions. But if you're listening today and you're a woman, the most empowering thing you can say to your husband is not "I love you," is "I believe in you. You are such a hard worker. Like, you can do anything." I can live on that phrase for 6 months. You know what I mean? But here's what happens, right? Men crave that competence. They crave to be respected, but they get it at work because they can do the work. They get the performance. Yeah. They can measure the success, and they get that respect. And so they come home and they start giving their wife solutions when she's talking about her emotions or feelings, and they shove a strategy down her throat. And she's like, "Well, I don't need your solution."
That gets vomited straight up.
Right? So she shuts down, and she's like, "I just want you to," she gets frustrated. And then he feels incompetent. He feels disrespected. So what does he do? He goes back to work to get his needs met. Now, he becomes unloving because he's feeling disrespected, right? And then so she becomes not necessarily, she doesn't want to respect them the same way because she feels unloved. So she finds her validation and needs, she gets her needs met from the other place where she can get loved, and that's her children. And so what happens is we do this, we drift, where a woman typically gets her needs met by her other friendships, children, and the husband gets his needs met at work. And then before you know it, like happened to me, we become roommates wearing rings, just roommates sharing a mortgage, and we're living in the same house, but we have two different lives because we don't understand that core concept. And so if a man can come home and say, "What can I do today to make my wife feel more seen, more heard, and more safe?" And if a woman can ask herself, "When my husband comes to the door, how can I make him feel more respected and more competent?" If you could simply just do that, oh my goodness, 99% of your marriage challenges would go away.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I've actually had men email me saying that they feel like they're losing contact with their kids and the wife has taken over. And you look at it and you think, well, maybe it's about your relationship together rather than necessarily what's going on with those kids. And that resonates with exactly what you've been saying.
Yeah.
I don't want to stop this until I've asked you about some of the listeners will be mums who don't have a male figure in their child's life. And that's going to be hard. They'll be listening to this going, well, yeah. But do you have advice for them about how, or just anybody where there's not a male figure or there's a very inconsistent male figure? Maybe they've got a dad, but he's living somewhere else. He doesn't turn up on time. He doesn't do any of these things. What can we be doing to give our boys more sense of, their place in the world and masculinity and a healthy masculinity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say find a man in your life that you trust and that you love and respect, and that has clear, I would say, fruit in his life, clear evidence of he has a healthy marriage, he has healthy finances, he's in good shape, he's, all those different things. Or find that the healthiest man you can find. Maybe maybe if you're listening, your woman, he's your father. Maybe he's your brother. Maybe he's, it could be a guy, there could be like a church community of great men, it could be anything. But get him around other men, not just boys. The boys they need to be around boys, and girls need to be around girls, but they need to also be around men. They need to see how men interact with one another. They need to see how men respond in times of tension, how they respond in times of conflict, or, all those different things. And so I would just say, think about your life like I did when I was looking for mentorship, really, because I was kind of that situation. I was a grown man, but I was a little boy at the same time looking for dads, right, to learn from. And think about your social circle. Who is that model for you, or who's someone and have that conversation. And I tell you what, every man understands to some degree the importance of this instinctually, inherently, right? And so I
want a compliment.
Yeah, exactly. If a woman reached out to any man who's got any grain of wisdom and said, "Hey, I'm struggling to find a man for my son or my daughter to connect with, would you be willing to come and hang out and take them out for ice cream or whatever from time to time?" I guarantee you every single one of them would be humbled, they'd be flattered, and they would be so excited to do that. Or if that man has kids, hey, could he come and hang out with, or she come and hang out with you and your kids just so that they can see, because here's the thing. Anyone who's in that position, who's done anything to develop and grow, understands how difficult that can be. And so they're never going to criticize you for wanting to be better, right? It's only the people that are behind you, or the people who, the haters, they're going to be the people that pull you back, but they're not going to be where you go. So it really doesn't matter, right? So that would be my advice, is really do some work and searching your community. And there are men, you just got to think about it, right?
Yeah, I think that's terrific advice. And I do that for girls who are friends of my daughters, because we should all be helping each other. So if you can even see a child in your community that may benefit from that sort of role, then, by all means, bring them in.
Well, it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Takes a village. There aren't many there, but we can try. Mitchell, it's lovely meeting you. Thank you so much. What's the best way for people to reach you if they are interested in talking to you about your work, finding your podcast?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Appreciate that. And so, you could just Google the Dad Nation. You'll find my face plastered everywhere. But if you search the Dad Nation podcast, you'll find me. There is a little tool that I'd love to share with your listeners, if you're okay with that.
Please do.
Yeah, it's just something called the Spark Starter Kit. Okay, and we go back to men's challenges connecting with their wives, and so I created this tool actually for my one-to-one clients, and we saw so much success that I decided to wrap it up in a digital little product and offer it to the rest of the world. And it's really tailored for the guy who struggles to connect with his wife on an emotional level like this. And so in the kit, there is, I say it's your romance on autopilot for an entire year. If you're feeling like your marriage is a little dull, like you haven't been intimate, you feel like just really effective roommates, this will reset the romance completely. And it all comes in a really simple by a link, and it's like cheaper than a bouquet of flowers that, let's be real, are going to die within a week. So I've literally had women email me after their husbands bought the kit and be like, who was that man that took me out last night? So anyways, if that sounds like interest to you, just go to sparkstarterkit.com, or I'll give you the link in the show notes, and you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much, Mitchell. If you enjoyed this, please send it to anybody that you think might benefit from it, whether it's in your community, school, friends, whatever, and do that right now. And if you want to contact me, I'm teenagersuntangled@gmail.com, or you can go to my Substack, which is teenagersuntangled.substack.com, where I have a lot more writing, much more in-depth stuff. You can also subscribe, and then you get PDFs, which give you the show information in sort of bullet point form, so it's much more easy to digest it than just listening over and over again, which I know some of you listeners do. And that's it for now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mitchell. Have a great week. Big hug from me. Bye-bye.